Hey, Quinn Redeker, PoliceMotorTraining.com. Today we're going to answer the question, when specifically in slow speed situations do we want to use the friction zone? And then I'm going to supply you with a rule that you can follow both on the street and in competition cone patterns so that you can answer that question for yourself and make sure that you're doing it right. After we go over that, we're going to go over some patterns that I'm going to demonstrate for you, and I'm going to provide some visual aids so that you can see exactly when it is we want to engage the friction zone. Okay, so let's just define what we're talking about here with the friction zone. I'm talking about the clutch, okay? The friction zone is that space where the clutch is not fully engaged or all the way out, putting maximum power from the motor to the rear wheel, and it's not fully disengaged or pulled all the way in, where no matter how much throttle I give this motorcycle, it won't go anywhere. I can't put any power to the rear wheel because the clutch is pulled all the way in. So the clutch on your motorcycle is really the gatekeeper for power, practical power from the motor to the rear of the motorcycle. Because these are big, heavy motorcycles and we want to go really slow in tight situations, first gear all by itself is too fast. So we need to go slower than that, but we don't want to stall. So we can't roll around with the clutch all the way out and the throttle off and try and navigate these tight patterns. We're going to stall the bike, or in some cases it's still too fast. So we live in this friction zone in slow speed, really tight situations that allow the motorcycle to have power, so the engine is humming at about 2,000 RPM, but it's not going 25, 30 miles an hour, it's going 5 or 7 miles an hour, nice and slow. So we want to engage that friction zone. Now, if you are a newer rider, or you don't know what I'm talking about, or you haven't used this technique before, this video is probably not for you yet. So I'm speaking specifically to people that understand how to use that friction zone and live in that space when they ride their motorcycles around, okay? It's a not necessarily very difficult, but it's very specific technique. So if you haven't used it before, this video is going to be very difficult for you to follow. So I would recommend that you take a look at other videos that are out there speaking to learning the friction zone. So for today, I'm talking to those individuals that understand how to set up their motorcycle and ride tight patterns in the friction zone. The question we are going to answer here, though, is, well, when do you do that, okay? So let's jump into that right now. Now, we're going to go around this cone in the friction zone. Why do we need the friction zone going around this cone? Well, we need the friction zone because as the motorcycle slows down and it starts leaning over into this turn, inertia is going away and gravity is picking up, which means the motorcycle is effectively getting heavier and heavier, and the pace with which it starts heading to the ground increases, okay? So it becomes sometimes insurmountable where we hit the ground, or we almost drop it because we get that roller coaster feeling. It's like, uh-oh, it's starting to go to the ground, right? We don't want that. Okay, we have a traffic cone here, and this is essentially an exercise for doing a U-turn. Nice and simple. But as I mentioned, there's a rule that we want to follow when we're doing this, asking the question of when we engage the friction zone. And that rule is going to be this. As we approach a slow speed turning movement, we do not, will not, shall not, from this point forward, add lean angle to the motorcycle unless we are in the friction zone, okay? Now, that's not to say I couldn't figure out how to go through here with enough momentum, even if I coasted, to pull off a U-turn and not use the friction zone. It's true, you could do it. But as speeds slow down, inertia starts going away, gravity starts taking hold, we might have the cambers wrong. It's important for you to stabilize the bike and be ready for whatever comes your way. You ever had that scary roller coaster feeling? You know what I'm talking about. You want to set up that friction zone and make sure as the bike drops in, that's already set. Not only from an efficiency standpoint, but in this case, this is just a U-turn. And as I said, yes, you could probably just carry enough momentum to get through here. But in tight competition patterns for law enforcement stuff, this is not on a course where there's just a U-turn. This is a U-turn into another tight U-turn, into a circle, into something else, meaning that there may be momentary spaces where, yes, I can carry some momentum and get around one obstacle, but there's 150 obstacles. You need to be able to make that friction zone set when you need it, yes, from the efficiency standpoint, but so that when the motorcycle's leaned over, it's there, because momentum is not going to carry you through a tight cone pattern. It might through one turn, maybe two, but you're done after that. So that's the rule. I want you to follow that. So take a look at this marker here. this green marker is your visual aid in this scenario where I'm doing a U-turn exercise. That is going to be the point with which I want to set up my friction zone. I'm riding in a straight line. I'm still straight up and down. Let's get the friction zone set. And by friction zone set, I mean the clutch is right in that friction zone as the throttle is humming at about 2,000 RPM, somewhere in there. Depends on the bike that you ride and how aggressive you are. So I set it up right here. Now, somewhere about right here, I start leaning the motorcycle over. But this is already done. The bike's nice and controlled. So what does it mean? It's going to drop over slower because I'm in the friction zone. I'm never going to have that roller coaster feeling because I've got power all the way through here. So gravity won't play a role now because I've got this set. From an efficiency standpoint, when I'm at this point, I'm maybe counterbalancing. I've got my head and eyes down track. I've got the wheel placement issue that I'm trying to sort out. There's a lot of things going on right here that if I have this problem already figured out, it's really, really nice because it's just less math for me to do here as well. So that's valuable. But from the entire turning movement all the way through here, the bike is more stable, more controlled. It makes a much, much bigger difference when you ride. Obviously, this marker here is related to a certain speed that I'm going to come in. If I'm coming in really, really fast, then that marker is going to start to move further and further back. But again, remember my rule. We do not add lean angle unless our clutch and throttle is set up in that friction zone. So I don't have to ask, where does this marker need to be? The question I need to answer is, where do I add lean angle? Oh, I'm adding lean angle back here because I'm coming in at 30 miles an hour. Well, if that's the case, that's great. So we need to set the friction zone up somewhere back here, and that's fine. So what we want to see is, we're going to see the friction zone get set up. So what that's going to look like is, I'm going to ride straight. I'm going to come off the throttle, but as I'm still rolling, but before I get to my U-turn, I'm going to set this up, the clutch and the throttle, so that I'm in a nice steady hum here. I'm in this nice friction zone. Listen to the motor. That's the friction zone right there. The bike's moving, and I have power, but I'm not going fast. So I want to be set in that friction zone when I get to the green cone. So clutch will be all the way out before I get to it. Then I will set up the friction zone, and then we will execute the turn. So here we go. Clutch is out. To the friction zone. We execute the turn, and we're off. Okay. Clutch is out. But if you hear that, let's do it again. So I'm accelerating, then I'm off throttle, then I'm setting up the friction zone. So I'm coming in faster, off throttle, set up the friction zone, and they go through. So it's important to note that we're coming off the throttle because we're carrying a lot of speed, and then we want to set that friction zone up. Off throttle, set up that friction zone nice and early. When you do this, what you're going to find is the motorcycle process that you have will become much more stable. Your skill level improves, but your comfort level skyrockets. Anytime this motorcycle starts wanting to lean over, that transition from going pretty fast to going pretty slow. And that's where a lot of mistakes can happen. That's where you can have those scary roller coaster feelings. So this will really help you in those. You have any questions about that? Reach out to me, Quinn Redeker, policemotortraining.com. Take care.